Welcome to the Dental Decoders podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Rogars, and I'm here to help you crack the code on all things dental operations. Each week, we dive into topics to help you overcome roadblocks, streamline operations, and reduce team burnout. Whether you're an owner, a practice manager, or a team member, this podcast is for you. Join us for insightful discussions, engaging interviews, and practical tips. So sit back and relax as we crack the code on all things dental operations together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Dental Decoders podcast. Before we dig into today's episode, we've got some exciting news to share. This episode is sponsored by Flex Dental, a game changer in dental practice management. For not one, but 3 amazing episodes, we are joined by Jennie Bauer from Flex. And during those episodes, we're going to dig into how Flex Dental seamlessly integrates with open dental software, offers tools designed to enhance communication with your patients, streamlines your team's workflow, boosts your case acceptance, and increases payment collections. If you are listening to this episode and you want to see Flex in action, check out the links in the show notes to learn more or schedule a demo. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. So stay tuned for this chat with Jennie Bauer as we explore Flex Dental and how it can revolutionize your practice. Now let's get into the episode. Hello, Decoders, and welcome to this week's episode of Dental Decoders podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Rogars, and I am joined today by the incredible Jennie Bauer, who is an absolute mastermind at all things Flex, and who I have actually had the privilege of working with in office and putting out fires. So I trust everything she has to say about this database so stinking much because I've seen her in action. I know how she works, and I know that she's just truly a powerhouse in all things dental industry and patient communication and making practices work more efficiently. So Jennie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brittany, for having me. Nice to talk with you.
Always great when we get to catch up and touch base. And I'm really excited to be able to kind of dig into Flex Dental and talk about all the things that it can do to help offices, especially at this kind of time of the year when offices are looking at how they can implement and make things a little bit better coming into the busy season in dentistry. So I think this is just perfect timing to be able to have this conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so before we get too carried away and start talking about all things Flex, I'd love if you could give us a little bit of background on you, who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into the background on what Flex is and how that works as well.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, I've been with Flex for almost 3.5 years now. Have transitioned in and out of the offices, but always in the dental field for a very long time. I love dental. I love working with the offices and the teams. You know, one of the best things is just, helping an office do things better, more efficiently, streamlining their processes and things like that. And one of my favorite things to do is a lot of training. And, that goes along with just, how can you help the offices? And, you could do 5 training sessions with the same agenda, but you always have a different outcome, because you have different practice needs, the learning style of the teams you're working with, and even just like the questions that are asked along the way, just kind of guides that training. So that's what I love about it. So it's never redundant. It's always new things being introduced. And, I love sharing my experiences with the teams and then hearing theirs too, because then I take that back to our product team, our training team, and things like that. I started at Flex as a trainer, and now I'm the customer success manager. So I work with a lot of offices, just making sure they're utilizing Flex well. I'm lucky enough to work remotely. And Brittany, our time back in Wisconsin is where we met. And in October 2022, I moved to Florida, and it's been a great move. And I do not miss those cold weather snow days.
Oh, yeah. I can't imagine leaving the snow and being like, darn, I wish I could go back to where the wind hurt my face every day. Right. That sounds like a tough transition.
Yes.
One of the things that I loved most about working with you and that I love with continuing working with you is, like you said, you take the feedback, and if I have a question and I'm like, hey, this doesn't particularly work in a way that I love, or how can I make this work in a way that I love, you always are the person who can be like, oh, well, here's either a workaround or here's how we can get this fixed for you. So it's not just I come to you at Flex or anybody on the Flex team and I'm like, oh, I really wish this worked. And you're like, yeah, that sucks. You guys are always so good to pivot and implement new things that make the office easier. So that's one thing that I just absolutely love about working with you and with the Flex team. team?
I don't like to just give a black and white answer. Like you're right. The question might be, can Flex do this? The answer might be no, but instead of just a no, our team likes to try to find out, like, what are you actually trying to accomplish? Like, what's the ultimate goal? Because maybe like the way the question was asked, the answer is no. But if we can find out a little bit more background as to what the need is, we can maybe come up with another solution, always trying to be solution minded, or taking that feedback back to our team as, a need and, popping it in as a feature request. So maybe it can be added in the future.
And one of the things that I just know about you personally is when we were working together and we were talking about how do we implement new change, you were always really good at saying, well, okay, let me play devil's advocate for a minute and see and look at all the different angles and possibilities and ways this could work. And I love that you bring that into the software side of things now, because it's not just like here's how we're going to do it. We're going to look at all of the ways that this could be impactful before we make the decision. So I think
you're right. I have used that word more than once, haven't I? Let me play devil's advocate here.
And it was one of those things that I'm very like, let's look at this point and just fix this point. And having that skill set of, well, let's look at the overarching thing is just a totally different mindset than mine. So it worked really well. And being in a software company now too, I think that's super important to have someone who does play devil's advocate and looks at the whole picture as a whole before making a decision on things. So I think that's super valuable in your role.
You need a good balance of it for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have a little bit of background on you. Our listeners now know who you are and they know all about our fun adventures together. I want to hear more about Flex. So tell me the background on Flex and what Flex does, how it works, all the things.
Yeah, absolutely. So really the history of Flex is it was founded in 2018, and the founder, his wife was a dentist. And they were just in the process of doing a startup, from starting the practice from the ground up. So, of course, they were eager to, streamline their operations and make sure that everything was going to be a good experience for the practice, of course, and then, of course, your patients. So they did go ahead and they were with Open Dental as their practice management software. But as they dive deeper into the daily operations, they were just finding that they weren't getting what they needed. They had looked at other patient engagement softwares and things like that. So the founder had some background in programming. And so he took matters into his own hands and undertook the challenge of developing, this platform. So it was something that was to address their immediate needs and concerns that they had. And then it just evolved into, where Flex is today. So it's been pretty amazing that we're going into our 6th year here.
That is amazing. It doesn't feel like it's been that long. I was lucky enough to start working with Flex relatively early after its inception. So I'm excited to see how much it's grown since then. And it's just crazy to think that it has been that long already. It makes me feel a little bit old, but that's okay.
I'm with you because we were together that day when we had the first demo when we were in the office. So lucky enough to be here. And you had asked too, what does Flex all do? Of course, we, are bringing in automation from things such as the patient engagement for your communications, for texting and your automation on that, online scheduling, insurance verification, customizable treatment plans that you can present to the patient, have them sign, present treatment options, integrated payments and collection options. I know one of future episodes, we're going to talk a little bit deeper into some of those add-ons, which I'm super excited to share some information on that. Then going back to patient reviews, reporting and analytics, and all those things, we just keep adding some amazing features.
And I love that when you add those amazing features, it's not like you're adding them when they're not ready to be added. They're not released until they're ready, which is great. So there's a lot less of the bugginess that we have to sort out when we start with those, which is great. I find that so often softwares are trying to just do everything and they're trying to do it too quickly. I love that you guys take your time and make sure that the product is ready to go before offices are able to start using it, which is great.
Yeah, we have streamlined that very well where we have, our beta clients as needed to make sure that things are working appropriately before we actually throw it out to the general audience. So yeah, we have a good process in place there.
Yeah, so I want to focus a little bit on the automation because I know that is such a hot topic right now. Every office is trying to find things that they can automate and outsource to just try and keep up with the day to day. And I know that Flex has a lot of fantastic automation options. Can you give me an example of, or give me an overview of some of the different types of automation that Flex has available that we could use in practices?
Yeah, absolutely. It just something from the beginning of, the traditional items of confirmations and reminders, taking those phone calls off of the team, those confirmations, reminders will go out automatically. Your recall, getting patients back in that haven't scheduled or that did schedule and maybe canceled or missed prior to their appointment. We send out unscheduled treatment reminders. So that is similar to recall in the sense that it's treatment, right? Those are the ones that can sometimes get lost in the shuffle dependent on what an office has in place for their process. If you go over a treatment plan, that patient says, oh yeah, I'll call you back. What does that look like in the office? Do they actually create a task to follow up in a week or two or whatever that looks like? Or does it just kind of get forgotten and buried until the patient's next visit? So we'll send out reminders on that. All of that automation right there is controlled by the office of what their timing and frequencies are and things like that, along with the verbiage. Forms is a big thing too. Of course, you want those forms sent out, when a new patient books an appointment. And then what about when a patient's due for a health history update, in that next year? The system will look at the patient to see when they last completed it and include it in some of their reminders prior to their next appointment to try to alleviate some of that time spent when the patient checks in, and bottleneck the schedule there. Review request is another thing that we can send out automated. So that's pretty amazing. That's a big thing right now. I always joke when I go through the review settings, how important it is to have good verbiage and, let the patient know what it is you're sending them and what that expectation is. And this is the joke that I always say, like, I base like my life decisions off of reviews. So they truly are like important. And when I say that, it's kind of jokingly, but yet it is kind of true, right? I think we all like go before we make a purchase, like, well, what does the review say? So, that's the same for a dental practice for that. We have email blasts. Those aren't scheduled, but you were talking about like this time of year when it's busy or starting to get towards the end of the year when benefits aren't used or there's that outstanding treatment. So, there's ways to send out email blasts, letting those patients know to, reach out because they have outstanding treatment or maybe they have HSA dollars to use and things like that.
That is so many different pieces. One thing that I personally find super valuable when working with my clients is being able to link the consent forms to the procedure codes so we can automate some of that as well. So it's not like, oh, did we get Miss Jones' extraction consent? Because Flex will tell me, like, hey, you need this consent form. So I think that's another super powerful one that saves a lot of time and like late and labor costs efficiently.
It does. You're right. And along the lines of consent. So, like you said, you can create your own consent forms and link them to codes. And what that does is it triggers an icon in the Flex main page to remind the team that the patient does need a consent form filled out. In the busy days of the offices, it's great for that as that little reminder. When you have new staff and you're trying to teach them if they don't have dental experience, of like, hey, this is when we need consent. Sometimes it can be really hard for them to follow. So just having that little icon to trigger that is great. I didn't mention on the flip side of consent, after treatment is completed, of course, there's post-op instructions, right? Whether those are given verbally or handed out with a sheet of paper, Flex does have electronic ones that can be sent automatically after a patient's appointment is set complete and open dental based off of the same idea that a code was completed and tied to a post-op form. So
I think that's so beautiful because how often Are you like, just even you on a day-to-day basis, you go to the dentist, you have a procedure done, you go home, you were just under all the stress of having all of that work done, and then you're like, oh yeah, did they say that I could eat or I couldn't eat, or what could I drink? And now I just have it in my email, so I don't have to try and remember or call the office back and ask them. So I think that's so powerful.
100%. When offices, when we talk about that process, they're like, oh, well, we go over the post-ops, at the appointment. We don't need to send them anything. And what do? Well, I play devil's advocate saying that, I completely understand that, because that's a great process. And they are doing exactly, what you would expect an office to do. But you mentioned the stress. I'm a dental phobic. I've been dental for a long time, but don't put me in the chair. And, a lot of patients are like that they're stressed over the appointment or other things going on in life. And they're hearing someone give the post-op instructions. For one, most likely it's going in one ear, out the other ear. Or they're like, well, I feel fine now, because, hey, maybe they're numb and they're like, I'm not going to have any problems. I haven't felt a thing. So they're not expecting to maybe wonder about some of those questions later. So you are absolutely correct. And on the flip side, let's say they maybe deleted that text or email with their post-op forms, and they call the office to ask those questions like, can I eat this? Or is this normal? An office can manually send out a post-op form to that patient as needed as well for a reference.
That's awesome. I know I got my teeth whitened for my wedding, and they gave me all the post-op instructions, and I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. I just want to get out of here. And then I drank red wine at my wedding with freshly whitened teeth, and I had pink teeth for part of the day. So I can see the value in having a post-op on my cell phone instead of having to retain it in my head, for sure.
100%. What sometimes just kind of thinking outside the box. I don't know if you remember when we were in the office, Brittany. I remember 2 patients coming in for bleaching that left because it was around the holidays and they had dinner parties, and they were like, oh, what do you mean I can't drink red wine? So we don't have pre-op forms, but that is something on our roadmap. But, post-op form is about the same as a pre-op. It's just kind of like, hey, this is what to expect. So when you do have scenarios like that where a patient maybe isn't understanding, the rules or what they need to follow afterwards, send it out ahead of time. Hey, I wanted to make sure you had this information so you were fully prepared for your appointment. Especially if it's something related to an extraction or specific foods that they can eat. Obviously no one wants to head to the grocery store after having procedures done or something. So if they can be prepared ahead of time.
Yeah, that's awesome. One of the automations that we talked about a little bit earlier, so I want to jump back to for a second, is the review request, because I know how important this is. I also know it's something that causes offices a little bit of like fear almost. So
Anxiety.
can you tell me how exactly? Can you tell me how the review request works with Flex, and how offices can implement this without necessarily having to increase their amount of patients that could potentially leave a negative review, if that makes sense?
Yep. No, really good question. So the reviews are set up in a way that an office can send them manually. So they can set up all the back end stuff. And if they don't want it to go out automatically to all patients, they could go ahead and just decide that they're going to maybe have those conversations with the patients and send them out manually as needed. If they do want to do the automated piece, they would still have all that back end, what's the page look like? Are they including a Google link, Facebook and or Yelp? And from there, the system will send it out automatically based off of what they would desire. Do they want it to be 60 minutes after the appointment's set to complete, or at the end of the day? And both of those I've had good feedback on and good reasoning why I would go with either of those directions. But then the office also, the last piece of it is they can toggle off review requests for a patient. So if it's expected to go out automatically, and whether the patient maybe was not having a good experience, or that patient asked not to receive any of those extra stuff, the office can turn that off with just a quick toggle. So then they wouldn't have to have that go out. Once they get to the review page, we can't prevent them from accessing the Google page or anything like that. But one of the ways we have is we do have what we call negative feedback, which actually really isn't anything of a negative feedback. It just presents a question of what could we have done better. And if the patient feels that maybe they couldn't leave a 5-star review, they can click on that button that says help us improve. And they essentially would fill out their information or their concern. And that comes back to the office via email so that that office can handle that situation, one by one as needed. So sometimes that helps a lot. There's a lot of good feedback that I've heard from offices that they hear some really good things through there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, no matter how great we are as a practice, it's going to be impossible to make everybody happy on every visit. So being able to toggle off the review request when we need to and be able to look back on that feedback if a patient, maybe we thought they had a great visit, but turns out there was room for improvement, having those tools as like a training platform even for your team is a great option. So I love that idea.
Right. And those patients that maybe just are adamant of leaving a review, they're gonna find a way if that's what they choose to do. So
Yes, exactly. Nothing motivates reviews like an absolutely terrible experience or an absolutely amazing one. You don't see a ton of 3-star reviews out there. So people just they're not motivated to leave a review if it was like average, right?
There's good. It's like, yep,
Mm-hmm.
that's what they think. They leave and move on. Everyone's so busy in life, so it is kind of a hard thing. But our experiences too. You find that having those conversations with the patients when the opportunity is there, that they had a great experience and they're so happy about a transformation of their smile or something like that. That is the perfect opportunity to ask for a review. I find that in the pediatric side too. Like sometimes when I talk to offices, I mean, as we know, parents get stressed, sometimes more than the child. And when that child comes out giggling, that's also another perfect opportunity, to ask that parent for a review because things went so much better than even they expected.
Yeah, I can't. Taking my kids to the dentist is just a whole nother level of stress every time. And they grew up in a dental office,
Right.
so they're not nervous about it. It's me. I wanted to just circle back to one last thing as we're starting to kind of wrap this episode, but I wanted to talk about the unscheduled treatment reminders a little bit because we are getting, sadly, towards the end of the year. And it's a great time to try to maximize those benefits and get those reminders out. And who has the time to go through that and do it manually? So I'd love if you could just elaborate a little bit more on the unscheduled treatment reminders and how those specifically work to help offices keep their schedule full and productive.
Absolutely. So, like I said, it's based off of was their treatment planned? And the office gets to control those settings as far as like what categories of treatment like they want to, include, what priorities to exclude. So what that means is, of course, when you treatment plan, and if you use priorities in open dental, you're going to indicate different things, maybe like, appointment 1, 2, and 3, and kind of what that would look like for the patient. But of course, there are sometimes those occasions where something is, more of a wait or next, that it's like we're documenting it, but maybe it's not a high priority. So it is really important that offices, when they go to toggle this on, that they're using those priorities appropriately, because the last thing you want to do is have that conversation in the chair telling the patient like, hey, I'm just going to note this. We're going to check it in 6 months. And then they get a reminder for it because they didn't schedule, that patient's going to be a little bit upset and maybe call in saying, hey, doctor, the hygienist, told me I didn't need this. Now what's going on? Why the change, So I think that's important. You get to decide how many days after their visit, and the minimum is 10 days. And then if you wanted to send additional ones, so 10 days after that first appointment, you can send additional ones so many days after, up to a max of 3 times.
That's awesome. That's so helpful. And there's so many different tools you can use to try and keep track of your unscheduled treatment. I see a lot of clients with Excel docs and they're running reports in Open Dental and they're jumping back and forth. And it's just a lot of different ways to try and keep track of that information. So if we can have a system in place that's running in the background for us on a lot of those things, we can eliminate some of those dreaded spreadsheets. I think that's just a resource that super powerful.
I think so too. And I always like to send those like mid-morning because it gives that patient that opportunity to call during the day, because I'm sure you've done this, Brittany, just like I have. You're like, oh, I have to remember to call XYZ. And you have like that sheet of paper, maybe it's that treatment plan on your counter. You leave, you go to work, if you're working outside the home, and you come home, you're like, shoot, I forgot to take that today. And now it's after hours. So it's like those are just those triggers or nudges to just remind the patient very simply. It's just a simple text and it's just a little nudge, just letting them know.
Yeah, I agree. That's such a great tool to have. So, Jennie, as we start to kind of wrap this episode, we are fortunate to have you for a 3-part series. So, we will be bringing you back in to talk about some more of the powerful features that offices can use when it comes to Flex. But I wanted to ask you before we wrap for today, where, if offices are listening to this and they're thinking, wow, I really need to implement some of these tools in my practice, where can they find you? Where can they reach you? How can they start using Flex?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can go to www.flex.dental, and that would take them to our website. And I know, Brittany, we're going to share with some of your materials to a link to schedule a demo. We'd love to give a demo, just sometimes seeing it and being able to ask their own questions of what makes sense for their office and their workflow, is the most idea. We're also offering a satisfaction guarantee for the first 30 days. So that's pretty exciting. And then practices that sign up from our podcast here will receive a free Dental Success Network book. So those are by Addison Killian. And so we have 3 to choose from: the dental startup, the front office manual, and the operations one. So that's pretty exciting to receive those books. A lot of good information in there.
There's so much information in there. So not only are you going to get the superpowers that come with Flex, you're also going to get all of the superpowers that come from the DSN group, which I'm biased because I am on their team, but I absolutely love everything they have to share. And I have all of those books. I purchased them when I was still working in a practice, so I spent my own money on them, and they've been super helpful for me in my journey working in practices. So that's just a really great offer that you have. So thank you for that. I will put the links to schedule the demo and everything in the show notes. So if you're listening to this episode while you're driving or on your way to work, don't feel the need to try to rush to write that down. I'll put the link right in the show notes. You can just click that and grab that link. Jennie, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, and I cannot wait to get to part 2.
Me too. Thanks, Brittany. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode of Dental Decoders podcast. We hope you took away a valuable piece of information. As always, don't forget to rate, share, and subscribe to help us build our community of dental decoders. We look forward to seeing you for next week's episode.